Is your state a winner in recent IRS migration data? Election integrity questions continue to persist. The idea of teaching civil rights, remaining Supreme Court cases, and addressing fraud. This is the Center Square Daily for Monday, June 8th, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. Right now, millions of Americans, and you may be one of them, making one of the biggest decisions of your life, and that is where to live, work, and raise your kids, and also where to pay your taxes. And people are not just choosing which new zip codes to live in, they're voting by moving trucks and their tax returns to different states. Now, the IRS putting out data, just as other government organizations do, like the U.S. Census Bureau, showing where people are moving from and to. And the latest IRS data tells quite the story. Hundreds of thousands of households, along with billions of dollars in income, are shifting from high tax states like California, New York, and Illinois to lower tax states like Florida, Texas, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee. Now, one state in this list alone lost over $11 billion in income in just 1 year. Another gained more than $20 billion. But here's what makes this matter to you. Now, no matter where you live in the United States, if you're in a state that's gaining residents, you're feeling the effects on housing prices, schools, roads, and local services. Now, if you're in a state that's losing taxpayers, you're watching your tax base shrink, which often means higher taxes or cuts for people who need it most. Joining us to discuss this issue and the data is Abir Mandal. He's a senior policy analyst with the Tax Foundation. Abir, thanks for taking time with us today. And this data, again, comes out every year. It's always fascinating to see which states are gaining and which are losing. So walk us through some of the biggest gainers and some of the losers in that tax filing for adjusted gross income.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me. So yes, and you're right. The IRS puts out these data every year. And for the latest data that we have from 22-23, the biggest gainers are actually Texas, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Arizona, in that order. Texas and Florida gained more than 55,000 new tax filers, right? North Carolina almost 40, and South Carolina almost 30. On the other hand, the California actually lost more than 100,000 net filers. New York, almost 72,000. New Jersey, almost 20,000. And Massachusetts, 15,000.
You know, when we put out data from the Census Bureau every year, they give those numbers of people moving from one state to the next. But the IRS data seems to go a little bit further, and that is the focus of what you guys put together in your analysis with the Tax Foundation. Talk about those real tax dollars that people are taking from one state like New York to another state like Florida.
Yes, absolutely. And the data, very categorically show that high earners are moving back and forth, which is, not surprising because, moving costs are not low, right? So like as a proportion of their income, moving costs would be easier for rich people to handle, right? So we can see in the data that Florida saw roughly, about approximately $184,000 in net adjusted gross income per new resident. And then Texas, South Carolina, North Carolina also posting gains with tax returns between 50,000 and 70,000. On the other hand, Massachusetts lost approximately $142,000 per departure, while California saw almost $60,000 per departure. And others like New York, New Jersey also came in that range between $60,000 to $100,000 per departure. So these are real dollars. They're losing high income residents, and that can't be good for them.
Well, and I want to talk a little bit later on about the impacts that has for those who are left behind, right? Who can't pay the higher moving costs. But I mean, you mentioned the individual kind of average per individual filer, but I mean, these are real numbers that add up pretty quick when you start looking at it. Let's take a look at states with the highest adjusted gross income gains. And as you said, Florida at the top of the list, they gained $20.6 billion. That's
Exactly.
fresh money coming into the state of Florida. Texas, $5.5 billion. South Carolina, $4.1 billion, almost $4 billion for North Carolina, and Arizona, $2.76 billion. That's a lot of money moving from one state to the next in just 1 year time.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are, as you said, these are real dollars that fund jobs, that fund new consumption, and they also fund, the new tax revenues for the government, right? So, um, again, like California, for example, lost $12 billion in gross income. New York lost almost $10 billion, and these are again, real jobs leaving the economy, and it makes everybody that's left poorer.
Yeah, the top two states losing adjusted gross income, as you mentioned, California at 11.9 billion, New York almost 10 billion, and to finish out that top five of the biggest losers, Illinois losing $6 billion, Massachusetts almost $4 billion, and New Jersey more than $2.5 billion. Again, that's billion with a B. Abir, Florida gaining $20 billion in net AGI, while Illinois losing $6 billion. You've got some key differences here. What have you found by comparing the states that are gaining not just population but higher income earners versus those states that are losing population and losing those higher income earners? What are the policies that are driving this? Is it the weather, for instance?
Well, I mean, part of it is the weather. I mean, honestly, our research shows that roughly, that obviously, we are tax foundation, so we study tax policy, and so tax policy, from the data, show that approximately 11% of a person's decision to move is driven by a just tax policy. Of course, there are other factors like weather, but then arguably California has some of the best weather in the country, and yet it's one of the biggest losers of taxpayers as well, as the data show. So it's a combination of factors: cost of living, taxes, weather.
Could it be jobs as well? Like, for instance, one state is a more jobs-friendly climate versus another state that may have a whole bunch of taxes on business owners and other types of regulations that make it more burdensome.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you tax people more, they're likely to leave, but the rich people also leave, and they take their jobs with them. That means that the state that they're going towards becomes better for jobs and job prospects, and therefore they start attracting the middle class and the lower classes as well eventually.
We're talking with Abir Mandal. He is Senior Policy Analyst with the Tax Foundation about IRS data showing which states are the big gainers or which states are the big losers when it comes to your adjusted gross income moving from one state to the next. You touched on this a little bit earlier about the average individual filer moving from one state to the next, and it seems to be more of the higher income earners that can afford to move, and they're going to find places where they're allowed to keep more of their money. How does that impact those lower income individuals who can't pack up and say, I'm voting with my feet?
Yeah, so for the lower income people, in the states that are losing residents, it obviously puts a real pressure on the state budget, right? And therefore, the remaining residents who already don't make that much money, they will probably face higher taxes eventually, because the budget has to be funded somehow, right? So it means um, you're basically concentrating tax revenues from the people who remain, and arguably they are of lower income. So the income base shrinks, and of course, many of these people who are actually who depend on the government for their sustenance. well, they also feel pressure of cuts, and so yeah, it makes things worse for them, definitely.
We've seen proposals across the country, like in New York and I think Washington State. They've got this idea of taxing millionaires
Right.
a certain percentage. Uh, this is just some of the policies that are being floated out there. Some have been approved, and it's being discussed elsewhere. But what would be, I guess, some of the responses and reforms that you've seen from states that are gaining versus states that are losing?
Usually, the states that attract these residents, like Florida and Texas, they have simple tax policies, usually low tax rates, and many of them have flat taxes or no income taxes whatsoever, like Florida and Texas. North Carolina is an outlier in the sense that it ranks pretty high when it comes to attractiveness for residents, but it imposes income, sales, and property taxes. So, but the structure of taxes in North Carolina is very, very nice and flat, and so it's very easy to comply, and the tax burden is also much lower. So usually we see simple taxes, we see good policy, we see we don't see soak the rich policies as we are seeing, as you mentioned, in New York and California, right? Which is also driven because they are losing money, due to this out migration that has been taking place in the last few years.
Again, this is all based off of IRS data that's released every year, just showing where tax filers are moving from and where they're moving to. Sometimes this data can correlate with that Census Bureau data, which are the top states that are losing, and they're also losing a lot of money. But I'm curious, in your review of all of this information, were there any outliers that surprised you with states that were, over or underperforming more than you thought they may? Any anomalies, things that made you kind of scratch your head a bit?
Well, I mean, one thing that we saw is that, like, the largest gain when it comes to individual cities was actually in New York City, which was, like, surprising to us. However, if you look at the income data, they lost, in aggregate, they lost income. So what that means is that poorer people actually moved in while richer people moved out of New York City. So that was, like, remarkable, that we could easily see in the data. Another thing that we saw was, like, South Carolina, which did surprisingly well, but they actually have quite a, their top tax rate is like 6.5% or so, which is high as compared to some of the others, like North Carolina and of course Florida and Texas, that do not have income taxes at all. So.
Well, it's fascinating, and I'm sure we could spend an entire hour
breaking
down the information even further. Well, Abir Mandal, Senior Policy Analyst with the Tax Foundation. Greatly appreciate you taking the time with us today, and we'll definitely connect with the Tax Foundation further on such stories and more comparisons of states across the country and how you, the taxpayer, are being impacted right here with the Center Square Daily.